And while that's bad, well, it turns out we've had a lot of crooks in public office. That doesn't feel great.
You know what? I think you can just about find something to agree about with everybody. I ain't ever think that I would agree with Rachel Maddow. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I don't really watch mainstream TV that much. But I'm going to have all sorts of mainstream news in here today because it's good. They don't lie to you. They're just not exactly truthful. And sometimes it can be deceiving. And if you wish for that to change, if you wish to live in a better world and a brighter world, then I would talk about these things with people. I would talk about them privately. I would share this privately. Because we all see really, really crazy, strange things going on. And nobody really knows how to make it better. I do. And with that, the way you make it better is that you do actually indict people when they do criminal offenses. You gotta make sure that people are afraid to do wrong. Because if you don't do that, then wrongdoing runs rampant. With that in mind, we are just conspiracy and we just wish to conspire to bring heaven down to earth by returning law to our court system. A pretty easy task if you ask me. It's not that hard, all we gotta do is follow law. We'd love it if you come and join us on this conspiracy. And with that being said, we're gonna go through and look at the indictment against Trump and see if there's anything there. We'll also look at other political persecutions recently that have been done. Let's see what we find out. Thanks for stopping by.
It is both fair play and relevant, and it is starting to feel important to remember that our politics broadly is absolutely full of public officials, current and former public officials, both parties, neither party, every state in the union. We are full of current and former public officials who have been charged with all kinds of crimes and convicted of everything imaginable. Members of Congress and senators and governors.
My bad. I forgot to tell everybody my political position, and that is I'm not on the right or on the left. I'm squarely in the center of if you know and understand law in a republic, you need not worry about a political position because you have a court of law. But we're not there anymore. They just beat up on people like me.
And senators and governors, even a serving attorney general like these guys, but also state legislators, big city mayors, statewide elected officials, cabinet officials, White House officials. It happens. It happens all the time. And while that's bad, well, it turns out we've had a lot of crooks in public office. That doesn't feel great. What's good about it is that we know how to deal with it when it happens. It doesn't break our system. It does not break our country to bring serious charges against public officials and former public officials. Even these exact charges that are reportedly on deck against former President Donald Trump in New York, you will recall that this guy, a former senator, a Democratic Party vice presidential nominee, he was brought up on charges almost exactly like what's being reported about allegations against former President Trump. John Edwards was brought up on charges for lying about and concealing a hush money payment that was made to cover up an alleged affair before an election. Those exact charges were brought against a Democratic vice presidential nominee and former senator. And you know what? You forgot about it because the country wasn't exactly rocked to its foundations.
I agree. It's really sad we got a lot of corrupt politicians, a lot of crooks in office. What are we going to do about it? Let's indict them. But then Rachel said something like, John Edwards, let me get this right. John Edwards, a Democrat running for vice president, he got indicted and faced charges. And they were very, very similar to what Trump's going through and is trying to be indicted on. Whether that's legitimate or not, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an opinion as of yet. But let's see what happened to John Edwards.
Truth in American politics. It's never the crime, it's the cover-up. An arrest warrant was issued today for former presidential candidate John Edwards after his indictment on criminal charges. And while Edwards has been convicted of no crime and might never be, these charges could carry a prison sentence, a serious one.
Hunter. Did John Edwards know where you're going?
Yes.
Does he know why?
Yeah. He might not know where exactly we were living, but he knew about the money, he knew about the methodology, and he knew about the sources.
But Edwards' wealthy campaign operative, Fred Barron, now deceased, claimed the secret travel plan was his idea to foil tabloids hounding a visibly pregnant Riel. The government says Barron spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on the plan, including one envelope stuffed with $1,000 in cash and a note warning, "Old Chinese saying, use cash, not credit cards."
Looking over the bay at the Lowe's Coronado Resort.
Suddenly, the middle-class Youngs were living like kings, with Barron footing the bill for this mansion in California.
You know, we were living in mansions, flying around in jets, and it was like falling down a rabbit hole.
The indictment lays out just how the money was spent to keep Hunter away from the attention of the media and in the lap of luxury. There were pricey flights for Hunter on chartered jets, including one for $29,000. Payments for trips to Florida, Colorado, and California, a $59,000 bill for a rental property. And in just 1 month alone, the government claims $180,000 was spent on keeping Hunter out of the public eye. At the time of our interview, Edwards told me he didn't know any of it was happening.
I do need to tell you, though, through ABC investigation, there has been evidence, or we've been told, that there about $15,000 a month have been paid to Miss Hunter so that she could actually live out in California.
I mean, I can answer this 100 times the same way. I had nothing to do with any money being paid and had no knowledge of any money being paid. And it wasn't being, if something was being paid, it wasn't being paid on my behalf.
Meanwhile, Young says Edwards was pledging his loyalty.
Edwards, John, I just want once again to tell you I really love you, Edward.
And promising him a job as the director of a foundation that was to be set up with funding from heiress Bunny Mellon, a major campaign donor.
I had a wonderful conversation with Long and wonderful conversation with Bunny. I think we can completely count on her.
But when the job never materialized, the relationship soured. And it was Young's book about the affair that finally forced John Edwards to admit he was, in fact, the father of Riel Hunter's daughter, Quinn, now 3 years old.
Thank you all very much.
The indictment is just the next blow in an already crushing year for the Edwards family. Elizabeth Edwards lost her battle with cancer just 6 months ago.
When John Edwards gets the indictment, ABC is like, he hasn't been convicted yet. We can't call him a criminal yet. We don't know if he will be convicted. He probably won't be. Spoiler alert. But let's compare that to what Rachel said. Because she said, had to cover up hush money payment, and it's him. He did it, Trump. Well, see, from what I understand, Trump only had a one-time payment of $130,000, and he didn't even pay it. It seems like John Edwards was flying them around the country, getting nice hotel rooms. He didn't have a hush payment. He had a expense, an ongoing expense. $15,000 a month, $28,000 here, $58,000 there. Got a lot of bills. I haven't seen anything like that between Trump and Stormy Daniels. Have you? Because I haven't. No, sir, no, sir. And I would also like to say, you're going to charge the man 6 months after he loses his wife? It's kind of messed up. It's kind of messed up. But let's see what happened to John Edwards. How'd this end? Because I wouldn't want to forget anything real quick because I'm an American.
Nominee and former senator. And you know what? you forgot about it because the country wasn't exactly.
Today, John Edwards walked out of a court a free man. It took 9 days of deliberations and a wrenching false start. But a jury found him not guilty on 1 count, but they could not agree on the 5 others. So the judge declared a mistrial.
While I do not believe I did anything illegal or ever thought I was doing anything illegal, I did an awful, awful lot that was wrong.
The verdict, as full of drama as the trial itself, leaves open the possibility of Edwards being retried, but that seems unlikely. Friends say he is eager to keep his law license so he can practice again, perhaps on behalf of the underprivileged.
I don't think God's through with me. I really believe he thinks there's still some good things I can do.
John Edwards was found not guilty on 1 count. On 1 count, he is not guilty. On the other 5, you had a hung jury. The judge declared a mistrial. That was so unpredictable. This is what happens when political persecutions are left up to the public. People don't really get arrested. They don't really go to jail for their crimes unless both sides can agree, hey, you might even be in my party, but what you did was wrong. It was criminal. You got to go. You got to go sit in a prison. It does happen sometimes. I actually believe that Illinois has like 2 or 3 governors, ex-governors, still living either in federal prison or they have been out on parole. Maybe they've done their time. Anyways, well, the charges were eventually dropped. The DOJ dropped the charges. They figured that they probably couldn't push the political persecution through. He was too much of a national figure. But what does he say? What does John Edwards say? He said, God's not done with me yet. God's not done with me yet. Right after the commentator says he's going to go help the poor, the underprivileged. I'd like to see if that actually happened, because I don't know politicians as helping the poor and the underprivileged. I know them as looking like they do, saying they do, putting out in public that they do, saying that we got all these good public works, hey, come see how great I am. But somehow their policies end up hurting us anyways. The next thing that we're going to look at is a district attorney kind of out of control over in Texas. Gets arrested for a DUI. Let's check it out.
The mugshots so far tell it all. One, a disheveled, drunken Texas prosecutor. The other, a smiling Texas governor. 2 characters in a bitter political feud that reached a boiling point one April night last year. And the drunk woman was swerving in and out of bike lanes.
I'm with Travis County Sheriff's Department.
Police pulled her over.
Have you been drinking tonight?
I had a couple of drinks.
Took 1 whiff and realized it was time to do a field sobriety test.
From this position?
I can't do it.
Okay, I'm trying to demonstrate.
What they also soon realized
I'm 90% sure that's her. You're kidding me. So district attorney.
Was the suspected drunk was none other than the Travis County District Attorney, a very belligerent Rosemary Lemberg.
1003, 1004. Man, he's just trying to keep you from tripping over. You don't need to be slapping his hands away.
The had a blood alcohol level almost 3 times the legal limit and verbally assaulted, even threatened the arresting officers.
Oh, stop. You stop. I think I'm going to hurt you.
Jailers strapped her down in a chair and put a spit hood on her.
Take this stupid thing off my head.
Former Travis County Assistant District Attorney Rick Reed, along with many others, saw this video
Give me my phone.
and demanded his former boss step down.
No, I'm not drunk.
Okay.
Y'all have just ruined my career.
She attempted to bully these sheriff's deputies into either releasing her or calling the sheriff himself so that she could avoid these charges.
An abuse of power.
Unquestionably.
That's District Attorney Rosemary Lemberg. Right. down in Texas, gets arrested for a DUI, obvious abuse of power, talking about taking the cops' jobs or whatever she was saying, calling the sheriff. I don't know, I wasn't there. She looked pretty drunk in that holding tank, though. Kind of obnoxious, too. And what happens when she gets drunk like this and she gets arrested and she uses this abuse of power, threatening the officers, saying, "You're gonna ruin my career. You've ruined my career." This is why they don't tell on each other, because they probably all got dirt on one another. The whole house of cards will come crumbling down. I mean, shoot, even Michael Cohen was recording his client Trump. They know everything about everybody, but what does she do? She indicts the governor.
I'm going to enter this courthouse with my head held high.
And in an odd twist of political fate, it is now Republican Governor Rick Perry who has just been indicted related to the Lemberg case. Mike McCrum was the special prosecutor.
Count 1 of the indictment charges him with abuse of official capacity, a first-degree felony, and count 2 of the indictment charges him with coercion of a public servant, a third-degree felony.
Here is how it happened. Lemberg is perhaps the most powerful Democrat in the state of Texas and a longtime thorn in the side of Texas Republicans. Her district attorney's office runs the state's Office of Public Integrity, which ironically investigates wrongdoing
Turn your whole body
by state officials. When she got...
And the governor wants to get rid of her, and she won't leave. He says, I'm going to exercise my constitutional authority to veto this legislation unless you step down or resign. What's wrong with that?
Well, he has constitutional authority to veto anything, but he doesn't have the authority to threaten a person who doesn't work under his control.
In most criminal cases, you say, well, let's see how the jury decides. In this case, everyone's first question is, forget the jury, is this a crime at all?
CNN's legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Jeff Toobin and many others question the indictment.
The governor has the power to veto this money. So the question is, how can it be a crime to threaten to use a power that is entirely within the powers of your office?
Found some grand jury members openly Democratic and openly liberal. Others are cautious about political affiliation. None of them, we found, you would consider to be strongly Republican. The grand jurors we talked to say the indictment was not political, and the special prosecutor laid out a convincing case. One did admit the vote was not unanimous. Perry's defense lawyer says the indictment is nothing more than banana republic politics and has asked a judge to dismiss the case. Legal experts say unless there's evidence of an actual crime, that indictment will likely be thrown out into the hot Texas wind.
That's right. The governor gets indicted because he was going to withhold money from her, believing that she's not a good example with her actions, with Rosemary's actions, being drunk in public. DA's office says, hey, that's a crime. And they are the only people who can move an action through courts in a criminal case. They're the only ones. District attorneys. So she indicts him. And of course, what is he saying? Saying, I got the constitutional power to do that. Think about how messed up that is. That's absolutely insane. She had a very, very obvious abuse of power. He gets indicted for it. He gets indicted for it. Well, what happened to those charges? Very, very obvious political persecution. Let's see what happened.
The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals has thrown out the 2 felony indictments against former Governor Rick Perry. A Travis County grand jury indicted him on 2 charges in August of 2014. A lower court had dismissed a charge of coercion of a public servant. Today's decision upholds that ruling. But following that lower court decision, he was still charged with abuse of official capacity. 4 days after he was indicted, he had his mugshot taken at the courthouse. You might remember that. The charges came after Perry vetoed state funding from the Public Integrity Unit. The unit, which operated out of the Travis County District Attorney's Office, investigated corruption accusations against state officials. Perry pulled funding after Lemberg was arrested for driving while intoxicated earlier that year. She is the Travis County District Attorney. Now, in that ruling, the appeals court said today Perry had the power to pull funding. It continued to say that district attorneys cannot change a veto, saying it violates separation of powers between the executive and judicial branches of government.
Coercion of a public servant is thrown out. These are two public servants kind of fighting each other. Coercion of a public servant is more like what those people do who are not real intelligent and they call up to the DA's office and they start making threats. Let me tell you something, you're not going to beat them up. They have all the guns. If you really want to freak them out, you should call them up. Don't make threats and be like, here's how you're breaking the law, man, and I see it. Better go ask somebody and watch your back. I'm just kidding. I wouldn't put in the watch your back thing. That could be taken as a threat. You don't want to call and threaten them. That's not a good idea. They have something called call tracing. So, I don't recommend you call and threaten them, but if you really want to freak them out, you just call and you tell them what the law is and that you know they are breaking it. And you wish for them to stop. That will freak them out way more than saying I got an AR-15. You better ask somebody. Believe me, it really will. But it had to go up to the appellate court. The trial court did not throw out the other indictment, even though it was a clear case of separation of powers. And you want to know what's really, really scary about this? What's incredibly scary about this is that in the appellate court, they're saying this is a clear case of judicial and executive power separation. You have to separate the judicial and the executive power. Because he was indicted. That's a judicial process, right?
The appeals court said today Perry had the power to pull funding. It continued to say that district attorneys cannot change a veto, saying it violates separation of powers between the executive and judicial branches of government.
Right? The only problem is that the special district attorney who was assigned to prosecute this before a grand jury, he's supposed to be an executive. They admitted to you that he's a judicial power, that the district attorney is a judicial power. Because they were the other side. They're not executive. Which means when you're in court, when the average man, the average woman is in court, they're going up against the judiciary, and that has a whole nother set of problems with the separation of powers in the Constitution. In all constitutions. Nobody thinks about this because nobody really understands what a prosecutor is anymore. I looked this up in a federal law dictionary. Prosecutor is the chief and main witness, the one who moves before the magistrate or the judicial officer or the tribunal. Grand jury. It is the chief witness. The chief witness. Now, I wish everybody understood the importance. Everybody's got to understand the importance of that. Now, next up is Tucker Carlson. Let's check out what he has to say about January 6th and the Trump indictments. And I hope everybody sees and appreciates. I'm trying to get the media from all over the place. MSNBC, Fox, ABC, CNN. And the thing is that everybody's going to hate me for it. Because everybody's going to hate some of the other ones. Not seeing that I'm trying to show everybody that their news place is telling them the truth, but being deceitful too. That being said, Tucker Carlson's little skit in this is by far the longest one. Let's see what he has to say about voting.
Source news stories. Ooh, what's new? These about when and where Donald Trump will be arrested, fingerprinted, and photographed against a cinder block wall for his mugshot. How much of this is true? Once again, we cannot say. Here's what we know. A Soros-funded prosecutor in New York, a man who ran on the promise to indict Trump, seems to be working hard to indict Trump, indicting him for a crime that no one even pretends is a crime, including the federal agency that has already investigated it and declared it not a crime. So in Manhattan, tomorrow, what will certainly be an overwhelmingly liberal grand jury will meet, and unless something unexpected happens, Democrats will have taken the unprecedented step of using a corrupt justice system to take out the frontrunner in the Republican presidential field in a presidential race. And if that happens, America will never be the same. You've got to hope that for the sake of the country, the Biden White House, which will be running against Trump, will put the country above partisanship and stop this. That Merrick Garland at DOJ will issue a very public statement saying that this is wrong, which it is, and therefore preserve for our grandchildren our justice system.
Don't you love that? The Biden White House, who absolutely hate Trump, have basically declared war on him and all of the people that follow him, all of the voters, all of the insurrectionists. He's going to put a stop to all this, because you want to know why? It's not lawful. But the only people who seem to be able to see that are Republicans. And I would say probably independents too, but Democrats don't see it. Democrats do not see it. And Tucker Carlson wishes for them to uphold the law that they clearly do not see. I just think that's kind of funny. We're going to go through this together and watch it at the same time.
As of tonight, that doesn't seem to be happening. In fact, as of tonight, it's not just Trump who is the target of this. It's Trump's voters. The Biden administration is in the process of preparing yet another law enforcement dragnet of more than 1,000 nonviolent January 6 protesters. These are not people who broke windows or tussled with cops. These are patriotic Americans who dared to question the official story of the 2020 election. They were skeptical. They did not buy that. So they went to Washington to protest. They thought that was their right. And as a result, January 6th. That was more than 2 years ago. What did these people look like?
Do you know what these people look like? They look like Americans. They look like me and you. That's what they looked like. They were there to protest. I agree with Tucker. It got out of control. I also agree that we should lock up the people who were violent. We should lock up the ones who smashed the windows and incited the violence and did the bad things. The problem is that a lot of the evidence makes it look like it could have been FBI confidential human sources, otherwise known as informants, who get paid very, very well for what they do. But that's another story for another day. These people just in Washington, D.C. to protest what they see as an obviously unfair election.
Now, none of the businesses in Philadelphia that were burned get money, of course. They don't have rights. They're small businesses. They may vote the wrong way. Obama's DHS secretary is happy with that. In fact, he says anyone who supported the January 6 protesters in any way, even if they never stepped foot in the Capitol building, must be rounded up and charged with insurrection. Watch.
See, this is why some people, they don't like Tucker Carlson, because he's a little dramatic. I understand. I can be dramatic on this channel myself. But saying he wants to round them all up and lock them all up, even people who didn't walk into the building, he's exaggerating what the man actually says. And we're going to watch what the man actually says. And that's how you know it's an exaggeration.
January 6th was the very definition of an insurrection. In my view, it's in the national interest that in prosecuting these cases, we call it what it was. You know, we read that the special prosecutor is contemplating charges for obstruction of the unofficial proceeding, fraud. This was an insurrection. let's call it what it was. And the insurrection statute punishes not just those who participate in the insurrection, but those who incite it and give aid and comfort thereto. So
pay attention to that. It's not just the people who break the law that are supposed to be indicted. It's not just the people who commit the felony criminal acts who are supposed to face a court of law. It's also the people who give them aid and comfort from prosecution, from the state, allowing them to get away with their crimes or try to get away with their crimes. That is just as much of a crime. Remember that. Because that's why he's saying we want to go lock everybody up, even their family members, even where this is how Tucker Carlson is exaggerating it. And if he wishes to talk to the other side, it's kind of a disservice. Because all they hear is you yelling at them. And I get it. I yell at people too sometimes. Because sometimes you just have to. I cannot understand how little girls getting raped does not enrage people to the point of yelling. I don't get it. I don't get it.
in investigating former President Trump and others around him, I think we really do have to call it what it is. I think it's in the national interest.
It was in no sense an insurrection. It was neither armed nor organized. It was a political protest that at times became violent and morphed, unfortunately, into a riot. But it was not an insurrection. That is a lie, and they know it's a lie.
I agree with Tucker there. It's not an insurrection. It was a political protest that turned into a riot. They know that. They know that. He's going to show you how they know it in just a second.
You almost get the sense they want those protesters to commit crimes so they can go to Rikers. Watch as the MSNBC panel derives what seems to be psychosexual pleasure from the possibility of another January 6th in New York City. Watch this.
We've got something called video, and it shows still that it was a riot, it was an attempted insurrection, and they keep going to jail.
See? He said it right there. See, just like they got video, we got video too. We got video of them saying it was a riot and an attempted insurrection. But if you know anything about studios, you know how much camera angles really count when you're trying to sell a story. That's something that they're not really going to tell you. Believe me, but there he is. He's saying it. It was a riot and an attempted insurrection. It was not an insurrection. That's why only a few of them are getting charged for it. But if they get those few charged for it, if they get those Proud Boy charges through, those Proud charges through, those indictments, now it's an insurrection. Now it's a conspiracy. Now let's go back and charge everybody else who walked through that building for being a part of that insurrection and conspiracy that we've already proven in court. That's what they're going to do if they get these charges against the Proud Boys. And I'm praying to my Heavenly Father, the Creator, that we as Americans are smarter than that. But we'll just have to see. Stick around on this channel because we'll be talking about that a lot more.
And so for those who think they're going to screw with the NYPD today, stay on the other side of the bridge. It's not going to go well. Even if they come into New York City and break the law, they're going to jail. It's pretty simple. Break the law, go to jail. There is no post-truth world when it comes to the court system, right?
Completely disagree. There is no post-truth world when it comes to the court system. No, the court system is absolutely post-truth, and it has been for a really long time. It's just nobody's really understood how to explain it. And if anybody did, they worked in the court system, and they didn't want to have to go and get a real job. They were not going to leave their career for their conscience. And a lot of them do. That's why Tucker Carlson, I believe he has a law degree. Megyn Kelly does, but that's why the people who broadcast you your news, news anchors, a lot of them have law degrees. They know how it works. They just believe in we're going to take the media to the people, we're going to sell it to the people, but they used to inform you about it. They used to do their job.
Pretrial detention.
No, certainly so.
Yeah, Rikers. Hey, and by the way, one-way ticket too. Somebody said it. Rikers. Have a good day.
Over the long bridge there to Rikers Island. Yeah, there is certainly the NYPD specializes, particularly post 9/11, in real shows of force.
Some of us will never tire of hearing Joe Scarborough demand that we lock up people who break the law. The filthier you are, the more hypocritical you are, of course. But what's so interesting is how you never see these very same people fantasize about locking up, say, the murderers or rapists or armed robbers or people who push elderly women in front of subway cars who are making New York City unlivable. This is a city in which the homicide rate jumped more than 50% from 2019 to 2021 because of their policies. They don't care about that. They're not mad at the murderers who caused shootings to increase more than 100% in that same period. They're not mad that Alvin Bragg, their new favorite prosecutor, dropped 70% of criminal cases, actual criminal cases, since taking office, so that these same criminals can continue to terrorize poor people in neighborhoods where... So they don't want those criminals locked up. They want protesters who vote the wrong way to get locked up. Now, it goes without saying this is an inversion of what you're supposed to want in a sane society. In a sane society, you let elections determine who has political power. You don't fantasize about your political opponents going to jail. You don't want a real show of force to deter constitutionally protected protests because those protests are the sign of a free society. You're proud of that. That people can protest. They don't have to be violent. They can say what they think. But that has changed over the last 2 years under the Biden administration. Here's federal prosecutor Michael Sherwin on 60 Minutes in 2021 in tape that we will never forget, speaking about American citizens, bragging about the DOJ using, quote, shock and awe to round up as many Trump supporters as possible to deter them from protesting Joe Biden's inauguration, which they have the constitutional right to do. Watch this.
After the 6th, we had an inauguration on the 20th. So I wanted to ensure, and our office wanted to ensure, that there was shock and awe, that we could charge as many people as possible before the 20th. And it worked because we saw through media posts that people were afraid to come back to D.C. because they're like, if we go there, we're going to get charged. We wanted to take out those individuals that essentially were thumbing their noses at the public for what they did.
That's incredibly scary. I don't care which side of the aisle you're on. It was not that long ago that the political left was persecuted in the courts kind of in similar ways. Like Trumbo in California, Hollywood. He was a big producer. Actually, he was a screenwriter. His entire career got demolished because he was a communist. He was too far left. It's a very, very interesting story that we should talk about some other time. It should be really, really scary when the government is putting so much pressure through law enforcement on people that they are afraid to show up and speak their political opinion. I don't care who you are, that should scare the crap out of you. See, I've understood that we haven't lived in a republic for a couple of years now, but I didn't think they would take away the democracy quite this fast. That's scary. That's really, really scary. You should really think about what Tucker's saying here. Real criminals don't get locked up, but they just make up crimes and pretended offenses and go after people for not crimes. That's incredibly concerning and incredibly worrisome. We want to make sure that people can't come back and protest because they're afraid of being arrested for just being there. That is the whole point of what we're doing, of how we're setting up this investigation, how we're charging these things. Think about that for a minute. Just think about it. I'll wait. Do you really wish to live in a world where the prosecution in your country is using military design terms like shock and awe to sell the Iraq war in 2003 to try to sell you on a war against your fellow Americans? Are you going to fall for that? Are you going to be that silly? Because that's what it is. It is a war. It's just not a physical one. It's one in the mind, the heart, and the soul. That's why we're trying to bring heaven back down to earth. Shock and awe. A military term to sell the Iraq war to the American public.
Shock and awe? Take out those individuals? Isn't that how you treat ISIS? These are Americans you're talking about, pal. That man in a free country would have no power whatsoever over his fellow citizens. And instead, he's launching a new war on terror against people who vote differently from him. This is bigger than Donald Trump, and it has been for a long time, and now it's escalating. So where are the Republicans, you wonder, the people you vote for, who are supposed to be protecting you from this, but the country from devolving into something unrecognizable? Where's Mitch McConnell, by the way? He's the lead Republican in the Senate. Where's Tom Tillis? State Senate Republicans who you voted for is don't worry about it. They're saying the same thing as a Manhattan DA threatens to put Donald Trump, the leading Republican presidential candidate, in handcuffs. This is shameful. They refuse to defend the Constitution or their own voters, and we really hope through the electoral system they are punished at one point soon.
I believe that Tucker Carlson video is actually called "This is Malicious." You want to know what I think is malicious about the whole thing? Is the fact that Tucker Carlson spends the 15 minutes that portion was going on basically talking about how the electoral system doesn't work. Nobody believes the electoral system works. Your politicians are not representing your interest over in Washington. But you want to know how we're going to fix this? You want to know, God willing, what will fix this? Voting harder. We're going to hold them accountable at the voting booth. And the thing is, and this is why it's so laughable, is because the entire thing is telling you, the entire segment that Tucker Carlson is putting on is telling you how to hold them indictable. I mean, accountable. What I'm saying is, if they're indictable, indict them. That's how you hold them accountable. The entire segment is about people being in a court of law, being held accountable. And he's saying that the courts are messed up. Well, great. I've been saying that for a long time, too. Actually, I've been saying it and offering a whole lot of proof. Now it's getting to a point where it's out of control. So even people in the mainstream media are talking about it. Lawyers are talking about it now. Other people are talking about it now. I'm glad y'all got to the party. Because I told you 5 years ago, we don't start standing for our rights, we're going to lose them all. I told you 3 years ago, a man got arrested for asking if he was a slave. But nobody cared as long as the courts weren't doing it to attorneys and their clients. Now that they are, it's atrocious. It's atrocious. Now, what do I think about Trump's indictments? Here's what I think about. You want to know what I think about Trump's indictments? Or alleged indictments, trying to get an indictment, talking about you're gonna get an indictment. I wish some of you people understood a grand jury, or at least why you keep them secret. Because if I were Trump, I would go and sue the prosecutor over that one. Way too much talking about that, and you don't got the goods. Not that I've seen. I haven't seen the goods. Nothing as good as John Edwards, or looks like John Edwards. But here's what I think about it. You see, I'm not even going to show you this clip because I hope you just trust me. But Michael Cohen's attorney showed up before the grand jury and said, oh yeah, here's what Michael Cohen told us, so I guess he wasn't telling you guys the truth. And who do you think the jury's going to believe? Because Michael Cohen has already confessed to lying to Congress. Okay, boom, confessed to lying to Congress. He also pled guilty. The news loves to say this. He pled guilty at the behest of Trump. Because he was doing crimes for Trump. He did some payoff from election schemes. Well, let's see what went down in his plea deal that he had to agree to. And he's an attorney, so you'd think he would try and make it as truthful as possible. Plus, the FBI really investigated it. Let's see what happens. I'm just going to pull it up on the screen here, but I'm just going to give you the facts. He sets up a corporation, so it's harder to track the money. He takes a home equity loan, a HELOC loan, his own personal home, to put the money in there. And then he turns around, hands the bill over to Trump's team that are running the campaign, and they write down legal services and pay him $35,000 a month because they double the bill. They take the $130,000 that Stormy got. They put $50,000 of technical services fee. Michael Cohen put that on there. And then the team, the campaign team, they just go ahead and double that and give him a $60,000 bonus. So he gets $420,000 for loaning the campaign $130,000 to pay off Stormy Daniels, and he gets that in $35,000 monthly installments. And they pay him for legal fees of a legal retainer that nobody could find. It did not exist. Nope, I don't think that's criminal. Not any day, in any kind of way. And in my own personal opinion, I don't think it was really criminal when John Edwards did it. Those people, the people who donated to him, they donated for a belief. They had a belief. That belief was in John Edwards. It was in the fact that they thought he was an honest man, respectable to God, and he wasn't. They got played. It happens every day. It happens every day. But when they realized they got played, they ain't no fool. They took their money and their support away from him. They took their money and their support away from him because that's law. I think it was absolutely atrocious that they went back and charged him after his wife had died. Dragged this through again, made a whole big ordeal about it. And political persecution is real. We're never going to stop it. Not as long as you have a government and people have their own self-interest at heart. The best you can do is try and control it. It's been that way since time immemorial. But the only way our society can control it, the only way you control it in a republic is when the citizens, when the people of that society, when the populace knows and understands law so that they can make sure that the government never breaks the law or violates the law. And if we could all just learn this one thing in law, just this one thing, if I could just teach you one thing about law and everybody make sure that it is upheld, we would have a completely different world tomorrow. And it's this simple. It's how facts get upon a record of a common law court. They have to be verified by a man or a woman with first-hand knowledge of the events. And the reason I say this is because this is what makes a lot of what goes on really, really corrupt. This is why you have grand juries, is because when people are committing criminal activity in governmental office, they won't come out and say, yeah, we're doing it. So you got to get them on their records and then bringing people in and question them, making them sweat. Because when you know law and you know how the game's played, just like all those lawyers said in Alec Murdaugh's case, oh yeah, I could tell he was breaking the law just by seeing the signatures on the checks. It wasn't that hard. It really wasn't. And the reason this is such a problem is because the women who got molested and raped by Jeffrey Epstein, they couldn't get a court to testify in. They wouldn't let them testify. Let's check out what happens. What happened?
Good morning.
So remind our viewers again about Epstein's deal with prosecutors in 2007 and why the judge says it violated the Crime Victims Act.
So that's really simple to answer. In 2007, there were victims, and obviously we know that there are a lot of them, and those victims brought their issue to the federal government, to local law enforcement, and the federal government was in the process of investigating and prosecuting. But what happened is that they reached a non-prosecution agreement with Epstein in 2007, and then in January, February 2008, the federal government wrote to those crime victims, their attorneys, and said, we're still investigating, and didn't disclose that they had reached this non-prosecution agreement. And then later on in 2008, he took the state plea deal, which was very unorthodox, because when he was in prison, he was allowed to leave 6 days out of the 7 days of the week, which as a criminal defense attorney, my clients would dream to have a deal like that.
So is this the same agreement that protected any co-conspirators, any sort of blanket?
Yes. So what happened in this ruling by federal Judge Mara, he said that he's not going to undo the plea deal. It still stands, and it protects the alleged co-conspirators. So their names haven't been disclosed, although we know the names of 4 of them or more. I guess the reporters found out who they were. But what Judge Mara said is that they weren't named parties to this action, so they don't have a chance to respond. We know that the U.S. government is still looking into them, and should they have an indictment against them or an investigation against them, their attorneys would have to argue that the plea deal provided them immunity and that they should not be subject to prosecution.
Because some of these alleged co-conspirators could also be involved in the case that's being built here in New York. So that was in Florida, but we don't know if that agreement also protects them from whatever was done in New York.
Correct. As a defense attorney, the U.S. government is the U.S. government. So it's my position that if somebody had a non-prosecution agreement that provided that individual with immunity, that should apply to the entire U.S. government. But the district attorney's office is saying, the United States Attorney's Office is saying that it only applies to Florida. So should there be acts here in New York, which we know that there are, that they could be named as defendants.
All right, so the thing that I keep thinking about throughout this whole sordid tale is the victims. And they are, for lack of a better word, not going to have their day in court, at least with Jeffrey Epstein. What happens to them going forward?
Well, they're going to get to have civil cases. Some of them do, I believe, already have civil cases. The judge did make a tremendous ruling in their favor, saying that the U.S. government violated the Crime Victims' Rights Act. So what that means is that they should have been informed of the fact that this plea deal was being offered and that he wasn't going to be subject to federal jurisdiction, that his case was being moved to state court and a much lesser penalty being imposed. As a defense attorney, I do know oftentimes that the government or local district attorney's offices don't consult with their victims, or they don't actually do what they wish that their result would be. So they do their own thing and they kind of go rogue in making a decision without actually considering what the victims wanted. Here, we know that one of the named victims wanted a criminal prosecution. She wasn't interested in the money. She was more interested in seeing him face much harsher consequences.
So why do they do that? Sorry to interrupt, but why would you do that if you're supposed to? I understand that the district attorney.
The mystery.
Yeah, the district attorney is certainly supposed to weigh a bunch of different factors, including whether or not they can get a conviction. But when you're dealing with the victims and it's not about the money and they really want to see somebody face a jury, why would you not even take that into account and go rogue, as you say?
I think that the time that this happened, 2007, 2008, is very different than today. You also have very young victims. So I think that the government probably thought that they were doing them a favor in the sense that they weren't going to have to face their accuser. They knew that Jeffrey Epstein would continue to proceed, that he probably would want a trial because he wasn't going to accept harsh consequences. So I don't think that that's what we have to focus our examination on. I think the fact that he was released from jail 6 out of the 7 days of the week and was allegedly continuing to commit these sex acts is what we should look into and find out how that could happen under law enforcement's eye.
Deborah Blum, thank you very much.
Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
So this is obviously after Jeffrey Epstein's alleged suicide, where nobody was held accountable for that one. They still know of 4 co-conspirators, but we only got a conviction and we only know about Ghislaine Maxwell, or however you say her name. The victims, kept calling them victims. Do you know what a victim is? It's a sacrifice to a deity, to a god. Some nations have human sacrifices to a deity or to a god, and some nations believe that they are the deity or the god in and of themselves. But that's what a victim is. See, they sacrifice your rights, they sacrifice your law, they sacrifice your ability to get justice to their deity, whatever their deity is. All I can tell you is that statute and statue are the exact same word in Latin as statua. And those statues are created at the Capitol building, OL, Temple of Jupiter in Rome. A temple to Jupiter in Rome that creates statues that they send to courthouses. And you get judged on by a judge. What is a judge? It is the supreme being, the supreme creator. So a temple to Jupiter in Rome creates these statues that God punishes you for. And a victim is a sacrifice to a deity. And the most interesting part is, and you can kind of see them dance around it. Well, that's so odd. I wonder, it's so strange. Why do you think the prosecutor would do that? Why do you think he would take their right to testify in an open court of law? And of course, I don't think they can say that because I went and looked at a lot of videos. I couldn't really find somebody saying they just didn't have the right to testify. They couldn't testify. They wouldn't say that. They wouldn't say that. And you want to know what the attorney says? Here's how pompous they are. They say, oh, they were doing it to protect the victim. They were doing it so that the victims wouldn't have to go through the humiliation of a trial. They were taking their right to go get justice for their best good, for their best benefit. And this is why it's really, really hard to say, hey, I stand behind Republicans on law and order, because a Republican dished that one out, brother. That's what they did. They kept them from getting a court of law. To finish it up and add insult to injury, they say, how could this be happening right under law enforcement's nose when everybody's telling them about it? I don't know. Maybe our system is fully corrupt. And heaven bless those young women that came out against Jeffrey Epstein and how brave they were. It is not easy to come out and tell your story. It probably helps when multi-million-dollar news corporations, multi-billion-dollar news corporations wish to purchase it from you. But until you get to that step, when you're going through the therapy, when you're trying to deal with it in your own life, when you are feeling so ashamed, God bless them, heaven bless them for coming out with their story. I cannot imagine how hard that must possibly be. I've never had to experience it. But here's Virginia telling you her story. And if you've looked on this channel, VO talks about her story. And I think that's incredibly powerful of her to do. She talks about how powerful it was, how healing it was for her to testify up on the stand. I am so incredibly proud of VO, how brave she was. If you watch this channel, she gave a testimonial on this channel and talked about how healing, how powerful it was for her to testify at Greg Newman's cases. Because that's one of the hardest things there is to do. Let's listen to Virginia talk about how hard it is and how we got to protect the young.
You're just thrown into a world that you don't understand, and you don't know how to, you're screaming on the inside and you don't know how to let it come out. And you just become this numb figure who refuses to feel and refuses to speak and refuses, all you do is obey. That's it.
Because it's probably easier, right? Than confronting.
It's much easier than ever talking about it. It takes a long time to start the healing process. I mean, I will never heal. There are pieces from me that can never be put back together. I mean, it took me having a daughter and looking at this beautiful, young, innocent baby to say, I want to speak out about it now. You know, if we can make that point across, that doesn't matter how rich you are, it doesn't matter how powerful you are, there are girls out there that will speak up, and I don't care if it's 10 years later or 15 years later, whenever you're ready to do it, you do it, you know, and you protect the ones that are younger than us. You protect the ones that we didn't protect before.
That's why I respect Virginia Roberts. That's why I respect the people who come out and talk about these things for nothing. The people who get punished for coming out and trying to show the public the truth happens all the time. Because we have to protect the people younger than us. We have to protect our posterity from a government this out of control. And it's almost so far out of control, we're not going to be able to protect anybody. Everybody talked about how the Jeffrey Epstein thing, well, what do you expect? System got played, the system got bought. He's a really, really rich Wall Street power guy. Of course he's going to get away with it. What do you expect? Actual justice? And I can show you that that's a lie. You want to know how I know it's a lie? Because Valerie Owenby went through the exact same thing. And they said the exact same stuff when Greg Newman was on trial for tossing her case out, not telling her about it. Made sure that she couldn't come in and testify on the record of the court. Because if those aggrieved women, if those women who were violated and molested were not victims, but they were aggrieved women with rights, and they would have gone up into that court and testified about it to get the warrants for arrest, to get the indictments, they would have placed facts upon the record of the court because they have firsthand knowledge of what actually happened. When an officer goes in and testifies, they're saying, oh, well, the victim told me, victim 1 told me, victim 2 said, victim 3 alleges. That shouldn't even make enough of a fact on the record to support probable cause. When they won't let you and I go in there. And he was removed from office for that. And Valerie Owenby, being as brave as she is, went back to try and swear out warrants for him.
I'll hold on to that note real quick. But I also do have one for Greg Newman.
Okay.
It would be aiding and abetting, mostly James Stapp, on helping him get out of the, what did I write down again? Sorry, I have to reread my own life. assisting James Stats in the prosecution of the sex offense with a child and everything else as well.
Okay, so explain to me where you're going on that. What it is you're saying, assist him in the prosecution.
Yes, of getting him off the hook, mostly.
Okay. Okay. So, first off, we have a problem. Let me explain this. Are you, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, you clarify for me. So you're speaking of Greg Newman while he was a district attorney, in the capacity of a district attorney. You're alleging this happened, correct?
No, actually, she's accusing him of doing this while he was impersonating a district attorney officer, because in the order where Greg Newman got removed from office, it clearly states in the findings of facts by a judicial officer that each of the three things that Greg Newman did in her particular case was grounds for removal. Which means he couldn't have been acting like a district attorney when he did those things.
Give me a second.
You're not talking about something that's happened since April when he was removed.
Yes, correct.
Okay, you're talking about something prior.
Yes.
So he was a district attorney at the time that you're alleging that this happened.
Correct.
Okay.
No, he was impersonating a district attorney at the time that this actually happened. He was not acting as a district attorney because his actions got him removed from that office.
You're gonna hate me.
And this is already a fact upon the record of their court.
There again, elected officials also have to be investigated by auditors.
Okay, even though the sovereign immunity doesn't count because he wasn't.
The sovereign immunity, no. I mean, that's just there again. That is what has to happen in our district. And I have to obey the laws that are set down, rules that are set down as policy in our county, because I actually am under the supervision of the chief district court judge. And so those are orders that are given to us. I'm not saying it can't happen, I'm just saying there again, it has to be investigated by law enforcement, because at the time you're alleging he did this, he was an elected official. Obviously is not now.
Yes.
But
they wouldn't let her do it. All of the crimes that she's not alleging, she's accusing them of, she is prosecuting, she's the chief witness to the event itself. See, an officer can go in there and get a warrant for arrest because she told him, right? And that's what they're saying. If you go down and speak to the police department, they can come in here. We will allow them to do something that you cannot do. But guess what, everybody? We're all equal in the eyes of the law. Everybody gets held to the same account, right? But you can't go into a court and hold somebody accountable at all. You got to get somebody else's permission to do it. How is that equal before the law? How can a DA, a cop, anybody inside the government go into a courtroom and testify for Virginia Roberts, for Valerie Owenby, for all of the other people who are aggrieved all across this country and put first-hand facts on the record of the court to get justice done with if you don't let them? I'm going to tell you, people, you want to know what happens in law when the government gets this bad? You got to stop asking their permission. You got to stop allowing them to tell you no. Historically, that has meant that you have to get violent. The whole reason I do what I do here is to try to avoid that. I don't know. But it's something that I'm going to talk about on Easter. I had a plan to do a video talking about Alex Murdaugh, how he had blue lights put on by the sheriff, a solicitor's badge from the district attorney's office. A whole lot of abuse of power, abuse of corruption government that was talked about in his trial, but nobody seems to report on that. Because how atrocious the murder of his wife and son were. And the thing is that he might have gotten away with all of the other crimes. He was already getting away with them. He might have gotten away with all of them had he just not murdered his wife and child. But the devil said, we can't get away with that. We just have to push the envelope and see how corrupt we have actually gotten the state of South Carolina. I guess they haven't gotten it corrupt enough. Because you would not have seen that case in other states. In most states, they do go after political corruption, but it's only when whoever they're going after is actually trying to make a difference. Because just like Rachel Maddow said, or whatever, it's very probable that they're all corrupt. Now the state house is full of crooks. Absolutely full of them. I was going to do that video next, but now I got to postpone it. And so I'm going to do an Easter video talking about our civil value and what that means. I hope people stick around for it. Because this is what they call civilized society, right? And I've heard people talk about the Republicans being a gang and the Democrats being a political gang. And this is civil society, so those are the types of gangs that we have in civil societies. And we have seen maybe or maybe not some of the crimes that they commit in civil society. And we've also seen the ways that those crimes have been handled, have been dealt with. Now, not too long ago, there were a couple of people from South Carolina, heaven rest their souls, and they traveled down to Mexico. I think there was 5 of them. Anyways, in a very sad course of events, a couple of them were shot, killed, 1 or 2 made it back. I don't know the whole story. But when an actual gang, when a street gang, when a cartel, when its members do something outside of the rule of law, like going and messing with some innocent people while not on duty for the cartel, when that happens, you know what the cartel does? They beat the crap out of them, hog tie them, fill a car with guns, and send it over to the police with a note as a peace offering. Hey, we've already held them liable in our courts. We're going to give them to you for you to hold them liable in your courts. Check it out.
New disturbing images of an offering from the notorious Gulf Cartel. 5 men badly beaten, their hands bound behind their backs, left for Mexican police in the streets of Matamoros, along with a truck full of weapons and a note on the windshield, apologizing for what they call a mistake, kidnapping 4 Americans, killing 2, along with an innocent bystander, saying the 5 men acted on their own and outside what they call the rules of the cartel. Shaid Woodard and Zindell Brown are the Americans who died. Eric Williams was wounded. Latavia Washington McGee, traveling to Mexico for a medical procedure, wasn't hit during the attack.
She watched them die.
We now know.
Good morning, America! Mexico, here we come.
Initially, 5 people were inside the van as it left South Carolina for Matamoros. Cheryl Lawrence says she didn't have documents necessary to cross the border and that friends planned to drop McGee off for the cosmetic procedure, then come straight back to their motel. She says she called police when they didn't return. A show of force, hundreds of Mexican Army and National Guard troops stationed across Matamoros right now as the investigation continues. Jay Gray, NBC News.
Now, I just played that kind of to set an example. And here's the example. The way it works on the streets is we don't go to war unless I don't punish my crew for what they do. When somebody under my power, authority, and control does some really messed up stuff to wreak havoc in our society of the underworld, you and I, we're going to battle if I don't take care of it myself. That's the way the streets work. And you can call them barbaric. You can say that's messed up. You could say, oh, that's how criminals treat each other. But I would argue this. I would argue that if Republicans quit accusing Democrats of breaking the law, and Democrats held their own party members accountable, and Republicans quit being accused by Democrats and they held their own party members accountable when actual laws are broken, we would have a much better world and a much better society. And if you are in one of those two parties, I still love you because you're still my brother or sister of heaven, for sure. But I would just suggest and maybe ask that when you see some evidence, some really, really solid evidence that somebody in your party has really, really messed up and maybe violated the law, I think if I were you, I would let my party know that that's not acceptable. That is not acceptable behavior. That is not behavior that I myself wish to follow or present to other people to follow, because it's despicable. It's absolutely despicable. The reason why political prosecutions or persecutions don't really work is because by the time you actually get it into that public arena, you got people on the right and the left. They're going to be on the jury. People who are on the right typically do not see Republicans as breaking the law, even if they are. People on the left typically don't see Democrats breaking the law, even if they are. That's just the way it goes. That's why they're going to walk unless they actually did something that really caused harm to people. But if we could just get out the knowledge of how actual facts are placed on a record and make sure that everybody has the right to get to a court of record and lay those facts down before the court, we'd live in a better world tomorrow, and that's what we wish to conspire and breathe together to do. Bring heaven down to earth. One world, love, and peace.
And senators and governors, even a serving attorney general like these guys, but also state legislators, big city mayors, statewide elected officials, cabinet officials, White House officials. It happens. It happens all the time. And while that's bad, well, it turns out we've had a lot of crooks in public office. That doesn't feel great.